Jaguar family at the time that your grandfather had created. And one of his great talents, really, when you look at the vehicles that he produced, things like the E-Type, they were not just his vision, but a demonstration of his skill of building a team of people around him, finding talented people, getting the most out of them, and almost making sure that they understood his vision almost innately. You know, that's the sense you get, that he sort of would sketch something out, and he had those people around him to turn that thing that he had in his mind, that dream, that vision, into something tangible. So was that Jaguar family something that you were aware of at the time? Did you see William Haynes popping around for a cup of tea on a Sunday afternoon? How much of an impact did that have?
Well, he was actually a pretty private man, and he kept his I'm struggling for the right word here, his co-workers, I would say, at arm's length. I remember seeing Lofty England a few times. I do remember seeing Bill Haynes one Christmas. He came over with Dutch, his wife, for sort of pre-Christmas lunch drinks. I remember asking him what his proudest achievement was. He said the E-Type, just for the record. But that was quite rare. The family was fairly close-knit as a family. I mean, he didn't socialize much with people from his office, from work, you know. But it's really important to stress that, I mean, you're absolutely right. You make the point that one of his strongest assets was his ability to pick the right people. I mean, he created everything that he did because of the engineers like Bill Haynes, Walter Haas, and Harry Mundy, Bob Knight. You know, these are the people that made Jaguar, and most importantly, the products, what they were. It wasn't him. I mean, he inspired them, no doubt about it. He inspired incredible loyalty, which when I still speak to people today, of course, there are fewer and fewer left over from the old days now, but the loyalty and dedication is what really stands out, and he was able to inspire that. And of course, you know, Norman Jewers tell many stories about they'd be working all weekends, all hours, and they finished and stuck at the job until it got done. Now, Grandpa didn't pay them any more money for doing that. They were part of a team. When the fire happened in 1957, they were back in production in a matter of, you know, a week or two, a couple of weeks, and that was because it was all hands to the deck, and they did what they had to do to get it done. But as we know, you know, Grandpa wasn't an engineer. He wasn't a draftsman. He couldn't even draw particularly well. But what he did was surround himself by really capable engineers, and he described what he wanted to happen, and they created it, and he mucked around with it and said, no, move that and do that, and more of a curve here, and until he got what he felt was right. On
full-scale models as well, usually. It wasn't like little clays that you do now or computer models. It was a full-size, one-to-one scale.
Absolutely. It was a full-size prototype, because that was the only way he could be sure that he got the proportions right. And then he'd take them out of the workshop setting, quite often take them back home, where he could carry on tinkering with them all weekend. My mum remembers quite often on a weekend he would come into the house looking for an old biscuit tin, or even a biscuit tin that was still full of biscuits, and literally start cutting it up to make chrome sections to try them out on a wing or a bumper or whatever it may be.
He ran that car company like nobody can run a car company anymore, certainly not a car company of that scale. He was, I think it's fair to say, a pretty autocratic leader in the sense that he was the boss, he made the decisions, and his team carried them out. Everything's done by big committees and shareholder meetings now. And of course, I made the point when we were doing the Moving Motor Show that he obviously had a very close relationship with John Black, Sir John Black of the Standard Motor Company, who is known as being a really difficult character in the motor industry, particularly stern and hard to do business with. And yet Sir William Lyons got on well with him, well enough to go into partnership with him to make those early SS cars. Was there that kind of hard streak to him, and did you ever see it?
Yeah, I think there was definitely a hard streak to him. Sir John Black, that's an interesting example. Did you see that documentary that was made recently about the cars, classic cars made in Coventry?
Yes.
And there was some really interesting insight in that program about Sir John Black. I think, well, John Black was obviously a fairly astute businessman as well. And there is quite a good example of when Grandpa managed to tease out the tooling for the chassis in the SS from him, and made him an offer which Sir John Black accepted, and immediately got the trucks over there and collected the tooling. And John Black realized that he potentially made a bit of a mistake and tried to reverse the deal, tried to renege on it. But my granddad had already paid him and he'd already gone and got the tools, and he said, no, I'm not going back on that. So I think their relationship was certainly businesslike. Again, he wasn't somebody that my granddad was mixed with socially. I mean, there might have been the odd occasion, but yeah, he could certainly be tough when he needed to be.
And of course, the problem with being a sort of autocratic leader, if it's all right to refer him to as that, is that actually, when it comes to the day-to-day grind of running a business, staffing issues, or sometimes there were steel supply issues, especially in the immediate post-war period, it must feel pretty lonely at the top at those times. Do you think did you ever get the understanding from him that he shouldered a lot of weight while he was at Jaguar?
Yeah, no doubt about it. I mean, it must have been quite lonely at the top. He had, in fact, it's staggering for me to look back on it now and think quite how much he achieved. You're definitely right to call him autocratic. He was. He ran the whole show, and as soon as Walmsley had gone, he was the sole boss, and I don't think he had in fact, there is a story that he didn't even have a board meeting until the mid-1960s. So he ran the business completely on his own, obviously, again, surrounding himself with hugely capable people. Alice Fenton, for example, is a very overlooked person in the story. She was basically his PA, but then rose to become director of overseas sales, and she was hugely capable, and he probably couldn't have achieved what he did without the support of those. But at the end of the day, the buck stopped with him, and yeah, he had to deal with supply issues, he had to deal with quality issues. Of course, the biggest thing was, labor relations, which took up a huge amount of his time and caused some real problems at different chapters in the company history. But yeah, he was definitely autocratic, and I think that's probably how he was able to create the company and keep it in his hands for so long, from the early 20s up until he realized that he could no longer carry on his own. He obviously had to eventually give in and have board meetings and have a board and fellow directors and non-execs and everything else that goes with it. He had to give in and do that. I'm sure he hated it, but eventually he realized that there was no way he was going to be able to carry on. He'd obviously lost his son and heir in that tragic car accident in 1955. I think that was a huge blow. There's no doubt. He was hoping that John would have come in under him and learnt the ropes, but sadly that was not to be. And so he realized in the late 60s, 66, 67, that there was no way he could carry struggling on his own. And that's where the rather unfortunate, shall we call it, merger with BMH happened to form British Motor Corporation with Harriman, with Austin Morris. He realized he needed to secure the means of the body production, which was owned by BMH, British Motor Holdings. And without that, he was too vulnerable. And he didn't have the funds to secure his own body shop. the best thing he felt was to merge, which is effectively what he did. And then, well, you could say the rest is history. BMH got swallowed up by British Leyland, and that was about the same time that he was retiring as well. They offered him a place on the board at Leyland, but I don't think he was ever consulted, and eventually they just managed to push him out. But as I said, he was retiring anyway at that point.
I think one of the perfect examples of the sort of loyalty and passion that he instilled in his workforce, not just those at the top table like the Lofty Englands and the William Hayneses and others, but right down to the man on the production line, was after that merger where they became part of British Leyland. And there's kind of a legendary story, but I have it on good authority that it's true, that they designed things like the Series 3 XJ6 in a particular way so that it couldn't take the Rover V8 because they didn't want, something that was in a Rover in a Jaguar. And you get the sense that that was the sort of legacy that Sir William Lyons had left in his workforce, that they were fiercely proud to be Jaguar and not part of the other BL conglomerate companies.
Yeah, there was a real struggle that went on for several years. Obviously, Lofty England took over from Grandpa, and he fought tooth and nail to keep Jaguar independent within Leyland. Sadly, it was a fight, and yes, I think they did. They did come up with some tricks like that to ensure that only their engines could go in their cars, because there was huge pressure to start closing some of Jaguar's engineering divisions down and amalgamate all the products into more homogeneous projects. And Lofty, fought it pretty hard for a year or two, and then I think it took everything out of him. And then I think it was Bob Knight who took over, who did a great job. But yeah, no, they were battling against stronger forces, and in the end, yeah, it was probably inevitable that that their engineering got subsumed. But you talk about loyalty to the workforce. Yeah, I mean to every level. I mean the pride, to work for the Jag in Coventry was a huge matter.
And that's how they referred to it, the Jaguar. Yeah,
that's it. And I met when I was working at Creamer's in London. I was quite often up in Coventry when Brown's Lane was still going, and often got for training courses and that sort of thing, and often got taken into the social club and met people who were still working on the production line and had been there when Grandad was around. And yeah, it was obvious, the huge amount of pride. I think they genuinely loved working for him. They just wish he'd paid them a bit better.
Yeah. How did he cope with retirement? It must have been a shock for him.
Yeah, I don't think he coped very well because he kept on going back into Brown's Lane.
Yes, as the XJ40 is testament to, yeah.
I mean, people like, people in the design team, Keith Helfett was the name I was trying to think of, who was working under John Egan, will tell you that Grandpa was still going in there. I mean, there was a gap until John Egan took over and the company was privatized again. And then he started sneaking back into the design office. And they loved having him there, by all accounts. Well, that's what Keith tells me. But when he stopped working and the focus was gone, I think he was looking forward to playing golf and having a bit of a relaxing retirement. But his health started to fail quite quickly, and he didn't have a long, happy retirement, sadly. But thank heavens, he did live long enough to see, John Egan, and the resurgence of the company. So
he'd have loved this today, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he would. He'd be amazed to see all these cars here. He'd be amazed, particularly I think some of the fantastic condition of the Swallow that I saw and the SS1. They're probably in better nick now than they were when they came off the production line. And he'd be so proud to see those cars as still around. I think he'd find it hard to believe if you'd have told him, 100 years ago that his products would still be around and about 70, 80 years long. He wouldn't have believed you, I don't think.
And of course, you get to do appearances like this and talk to lucky people like us about Sir William Lyons, who founded Jaguar and made these wonderful cars that we're here enjoying in the sunshine at Newby Hall. As you look back over some of the things that you've done around Jaguar, what's been the most poignant for you over the years?
Well, I've been really privileged to take part in some fantastic events, not so much recently, but I mean, actually, one striking one for me is when we went back to Le Mans. Now, let me see. This was when Bob Tullius first started racing the Group 44 cars. So this would be the early 80s, I think. Would it be 82, 83? My memory's a bit vague on that. And actually, it was just before Grandad died, so it had to be sort of 81, 82. And Grandad was slated to go out to Le Mans. He'd got John Egan was taking a plane of all the directors and senior management over to Le Mans to watch the race. And they'd invited Grandad. And he was all set to go. And then just a few days before, his health failed again, and he didn't feel up to the trip. So he asked if I could take his place, which I was, of course, delighted to do. And it was just incredible. So I made my way up to Wattenbury Hall. And his driver, his chauffeur, Ron Adam, took me to Birmingham Airport, where I met the Jaguar plane, flew out to Le Mans, witnessed all of that. Incredible. I mean, obviously, the record shows that, you know, they didn't do particularly well. But
well, of course, they were there under IMSA regulations as an invite from American IMSA series to Le Mans, and yeah, it was never a car that would ever do well at Le Mans because it was built for the American circuits at the time, wasn't it? And but it did set the seed for what Tom Walkinshaw Racing would later come on to succeed with. So yeah,
absolutely.
Amazing moment.
Yeah, I think it gave them the confidence to move on from there. But actually, when I returned, I was expecting to sort of make my way home, and Ron Adam met me at Birmingham Airport and said, "Right, well, your granddad's waiting. He's expecting a full report." And because it's my first time ever at Le Mans, I was captivated by the whole thing. Stayed up the whole night. I never made it to the hotel which they'd laid on for us. So I was completely shattered. And so yeah, I was marched up to Granddad's bedroom where he was still in bed, and he expected a completely blow-by-blow account of the whole race, which I tried my best to do. Except I seem to recall telling him that the cars are doing 300 miles an hour down the Le Mans Straight, and this is pre the chicanes, of course. And I remember him looking at me and shaking his head. And I said, well, "What do you mean? You don't know how fast these cars are. I mean, I was there." And he was shaking his head. 300 miles an hour. He knew they weren't doing 300 miles an hour. They might have been doing 300 and something K an hour down the straight. But he, you know, of course he knew.
Well, I could sit in the sunshine and hear these stories all day. Unfortunately, the crowd out there wants some live music now. Do you want some live music? Yeah, they're ready for it. Mark Rubery's on his way in just a moment. But Michael Quinn, what a fantastic privilege to have you here with us, here in the sunshine at the Summer Jaguar Festival. Thank you so much for sharing that wonderful insight.
Well, Wayne, thank you very much for having me here. I've really enjoyed it. I'll come back any time. And it's great to see so many people here enjoying the day. I hope that was of some interest to you. And I hope you enjoy your day. Thanks for coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Quinn.